In today's conversation, we are talking about leadership biases, leading with honesty, and the leadership skill that's so hard, which is to define and face reality. But most of all, the invitation that God extends to us onto the path that brings us back to Him, for us to invite His loving gaze into our hearts, to be examined by Him, and to lean into the desire of discovering what is hidden within us and be free to walk in His everlasting way. So I pray that in today's conversation, that desire would also be stirred for you because this is tricky and this is vulnerable, but it leads to the way everlasting. And so the scripture we want to read as we head into today's conversation is from Psalm 139. God, I invite your searching gaze into my heart. Examine me through and through. Find out everything that might be hidden within me. Put me to the test and sift through all my anxious cares. See if there's any path of pain I'm walking on, and lead me back to your glorious everlasting way, the path that brings me back to you. And so, what a joy and a privilege to be on a call with leaders all around the world where we tackle really difficult and challenging topics. I hope you are open to it with me as we're going to learn from an incredible specialist who studied this topic in depth. Peter Nicoll is a leadership coach and trainer and has served in several leadership positions in OM, an international missions organization. He has trained and journeyed with many leaders over many years and across many organizations and countries, ministry organizations, and he really brings today's insights from walking the walk with leaders. Peter, I've really enjoyed our time preparing for this together. And I'm so inspired by the humble way in which you offer your knowledge with a deep desire to serve God and to serve leaders. Before we start, won't you just say hi and perhaps share
Mm.
with us why is this topic so close to your heart?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be with you this afternoon. I think I'm basically a pastor who has gone into leadership, and my heart is to see people grow to their full capacity, full potential that God created them, and then to see the tragedy when that doesn't happen, and
Mm,
trying to understand what is it that stops people from being all that God wants them to be, especially leaders. Yeah.
mm. Great. Well, we are so blessed to have you here. From your experience, Peter, what makes it so difficult for us as leaders to truly see ourselves and our situations as they are, whether we intentionally or unintentionally ignore or simply choose not to be aware of certain realities?
Yeah. I think the first thing is we struggle with what the Bible says that all of us are fallen. We're all damaged goods, and we don't like to think of ourselves in that way. And so the very first thing is we think we're better than what we really are, and we think we are more independent than what we really are or should be, or as God's designed us to be. And we don't want to, and sometimes we can't because of our defending ourselves, really deal with our vulnerability or our weaknesses. We struggle to go there, especially if our model of leadership, which I think South Africa to a large extent is a model of strength, of somebody who knows everything, who somebody's in charge all of the time, that actually counteracts the ability and the freedom to question and search out where we're struggling and where we need help. Um, I think all of us have blind spots. And the interesting thing is the blind spots are, yes, related to some of our weaknesses, but also sometimes related to our strengths. Strength, when it's overplayed, becomes a blind spot. And folk who are seen as strong and good leaders are often blind to what's really going on. For instance, if I'm really task focused, I'm going to get things done, I'm going to accomplish things, but in the process, I might trample over people. And then on the contrary, the other side, if I'm a leader who really has compassion for people and wants to see them comfortable and growing, then it might stop me from actually pursuing the task and compromises the effectiveness of our organization because I'm very sensitive to people. So we get this balance of the whole time of our strengths and our weaknesses. Um, yeah, if I'm insecure, and we find quite a lot of leaders who are insecure, and for different reasons. It might just be as a person, I really feel I haven't got it all together. And then there are also people who've been put into leadership positions and are suffering from what is known as imposter syndrome, where I'm just saying, I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. And when we're insecure, often we tend to defend ourselves. We tend to protect our ego and we become defensive. We don't really listen to critics and we struggle and we develop these blind spots. I think one of the fascinating things for me is a thing called the Abilene paradox, where there's a group of people because of loyalty, either to the leader or sometimes even to the cause, would agree together on something as a group or a leadership team that they would never have decided or agreed on individually on the basis of what they have. And so I think there's that blind spot of loyalty where I don't question as I should. I don't decide as I would in my own home. And we've seen many disasters internationally, where like Watergate affair goes, the whole group of leadership of a country deciding on something that they know was unethical, because of loyalty to their people. I
Mm.
think the strangest one for me is even vision can become a blind spot. I came into leadership after a leadership crisis, and the crisis arose because they had such clear and strong vision that they'd purchased a ship to replace a specific ship. But it was evident to everybody else except the leadership that the ship that was being replaced was in better condition than one of the other vessels they had, which should have been scrapped first. But out of vision, they said, we're going to replace this ship with this ship. And they scrapped a really good ship, and we were left with a ship that had a lot more trouble going. And so, even vision, interestingly enough, can create blind spots if we're married to the vision without being careful, asking God for discernment and what's going on around us. So I think that's sort of a summary from my side of just some of those issues. Sometimes they're internal, personal, sometimes they're situational. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. That's fascinating. Thank you for that, Peter. And what I hear is that we all have these biases. So the question at the beginning of this conversation is not whether you have it or not. It's the acknowledging the truth, facing the reality first, that we all have biases and that it's something we develop.
Mhm.
Um, but it could lead to like the examples that you shared now. So could you tell us a bit more? What is at stake when we avoid or distort reality?
Yeah, inevitably, in my experience, I've my career's main job has been stepping into places where there's been a leadership crisis and something's imploded, and it just hasn't worked. And so, learning lessons from that situation. Um, I've always said decisions are as good as the information on which they are based. And if you've been selective in the information you're looking at, in the feedback you're choosing to hear, then you're going to make bad decisions. So bad decisions are a first thing that comes about from someone who is not listening, not paying attention, or avoiding what's around them. And that will lead to probably the most fundamental flaw in leadership is a loss of trust. If as leaders we lose the trust of our people, we lose the trust of our stakeholders, trust of our donors, the whole thing will implode. And when we're not doing well, when we're seen to be making bad decisions, um, there is that loss of trust, and our people, um, yeah, just are not going to follow us fully and wholeheartedly. Uh, we also become irrelevant. We have the right questions to the wrong answers, or the wrong answers to the right questions, or the other way around, whatever it is. But we start paying attention where we should be paying attention to other things. We defend things that actually should be scrapped, and so we become irrelevant. And I think that's also a great danger there. Um, I've talked with Nina about with you about this before. One of the things that I started developing in a toxic leadership situation was allergies towards people and allergies towards certain subjects. And I think as a leader, when you're feeling vulnerable, when you're feeling I'm not completely healthy, uh, sometimes I develop an allergy towards people and I just stop listening to them. I just don't meet with them anymore. I form an allergy towards a certain topic or subject that keeps coming up, and I just don't want to even put it on the agenda. So to guard against those things where it's an allergic reaction from my side, but to really pay attention to it because it's what God has put before me. Um, I think the other fallout is it affects our teams because often when, as a leader, things are going wrong, I love it when people say yes and are on my side, and then we form a division between those who are for us and those who are against us. And sometimes leaders actually build that division in order to have the support of those who support them. And we just encourage almost the separation because then they're my people and they support me rather than going after those who um, I don't want to hear what they're saying. I don't want to go there. And also, it means that my team starts functioning in terms of covering their own back rather than chasing the purpose for which we are there. And we end up doing damage control rather than effective ministry. And I think that's also something that happens if we don't do that. And it can be a cycle because when something goes sour, then we defend ourselves, and then it becomes more bitter, and the cycle deteriorates, and we can end up with complete implosion. And we end up defending bad decisions, criticizing those who speaking against us. We alienate them, give them the cold shoulder. But I think one thing I've learned is if leaders do not address a situation, then fear or passion will. If leaders don't address a situation, then fear or passion will. And so if I avoid addressing reality, then those who are fearful of that reality will step in and fear will control them, and it'll be a negative motivation and an unfaithful motivation. Or there might be other people who come with a passion and they come with this emotional commitment to this thing I'm avoiding. And it causes all kinds of tensions and frustrations with them. So it's better that a leader does address a situation, faces reality, so that there's a balance and cool-headedness in how we go forward. But the
Wow.
basis is a broken trust is
Mm.
probably the biggest issue on which everything else is built or falls.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
so insightful. Thank you, Peter. And I'm so glad to see Renette's posted some of that in in the chat. And just to say to everyone as well, we'll post those notes on the WhatsApp group afterwards because you've made such great points of bad decisions, breaking trust, creating distance in a team. And this last piece really struck me of fear and passion will step in when leaders don't. And just want to make sure I understand that correctly. Are you meaning the people who follow, those who we are supposed to lead, will come with fear and passion, where the
Yeah.
leaders don't face reality?
Yeah. Or fear will grip them and they won't follow with us. Or passionately, they may start their own little special interest group, which deals with the issue on the
Yeah.
sideline and around the coffee machine rather than actually where the decision should be made.
Yeah, exactly. And that is detrimental for the mission. So something we
Yeah.
really want to avoid.
Yeah.
So before we go into the how, could you tell us when we look at the life of Jesus, what do we see about how he defined and faced reality, even when it was uncomfortable or unpopular?
Yeah. It's actually fascinating. Jesus never avoided reality, um, and never held back on speaking or explaining what reality was. I just think of the example of Peter. You know, here's Peter who had just proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah and was commended for it and has felt confident. And then Jesus in Matthew 16 goes on to say, predicting his death. And Peter turns around and says, no, never. That's not going to happen. And immediately Jesus turns to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You have the things of man before you, not the things of God. And you know, that's the kind of thing that as leaders we may, whoa, you know, I'm not going to be so offensive. This person is really looking out for me. They're wanting the best for me. But Jesus said right from the beginning, Peter, it's clear. don't oppose what God's going to do. And he was willing to confront him. And some of us would have even said, insulted him, get you behind me, Satan, that he's a tool in the enemy's hand. So it's fascinating that Jesus addresses that. I just think of the woman at the well as well. The conversations going on, it's very superficial. It's about religion and what the Samaritans and the Jews do. And then Jesus says, well, let's get to the real issue. Go and fetch your husband. Whoa, suddenly reality was there. And on the basis of that reality, this lady came to be reconciled to her community, accepted by Jesus, and became, we talk in missions about finding the person of peace so that we can bring the gospel to a community. She, this isolated Samaritan woman living in shame, became the person of peace for a whole community. And Jesus and his disciples went and lived there for another 2 days. So Jesus confronted reality, but for the good. The It's interesting. Jesus spoke of hell more than anybody else in the New Testament. If that's not confronting reality, I don't know what's, or defining reality. He said the issues are real and the issues are eternal, and don't ignore the fact of hell. So I think we see quite clearly in Jesus's leadership that he addressed reality. I think the other thing about Jesus addressing reality is he never felt he had to be the one doing it all of the time. He empowered others to discover reality for themselves. And again, even in the example of Peter, if I was Jesus, I would have said to the disciples, guys, listen up, take out your notebooks. I am the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You got that right. Do you understand? But Jesus doesn't do that. He says, who do the people say I am? So there's looking at the reality of society, the reality of what the community says about him, the reality into which the message must go. And then he comes back and says, Peter, and to the other disciples, but who do you say I am? And then Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says to him, blessed are you, Simon, for this has been revealed to you by the Father. And it's fascinating that if Jesus had just made a declaration of the reality and not allowed Simon to discover reality for himself, he would never have known what it was to be inspired by God into truth, something that he had to have as a leader going forward for the church. So to see again how God, who Jesus, even blind Bartimaeus, so often we think leadership, and we would say this, leadership is stating the obvious. But Jesus didn't always state the obvious to get to reality. This blind man, Bartimaeus, is standing in front of him, and Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? The reality is you have to choose. The reality is you have to make a choice and tell me what you want. And so I think there's that balance of we give leadership, but at times we really need to develop within our people the ability to grasp reality, to make choices about reality. And Jesus did that very clearly.
Sure. There's something in that really strikes me, Peter. I'd never thought about it that way, that another leadership task is to create that space.
Yeah,
And he did it, Jesus did it in such a humble and gentle way,
yeah,
but also with a lot of courage to really to discern when it is a moment to guide someone to discover reality for themselves. Yeah, that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. And he's done it also with great courage. I must say, when you shared the examples, it felt a little bit scary to me. But it's wonderful that we can look to him. He models it for us, and we can,
mm,
if we just follow him, he will give us that courage. Um, so I was wondering, can you share with us what can this open up for us as leaders if we learn how to do this? Have you seen
yeah.
this kind of courage lead to growth and greater freedom? Yeah.
Yeah, I think on your comment, which is very true, that actually reality is often, and probably more often than not, scary. And a reality is a challenge that we don't just think, well, life is cozy because now I know what reality is. It's usually reality is a challenge. It demands courage of me. It demands a lot from me. I'm reminded of Clint Eastwood in the movie Magnum Force, where he says a man has got to know his limitations. And I think for us as leaders, often to define reality is that whole thing of what are the limitations. And for us, we're uncomfortable with that often. Uh, but when I've seen people who've really thrived and really been in ministry, it's people who are willing to face what is not pleasant about themselves, what is not healthy about themselves. And somebody said the truth will set you free, but first it'll make you mad, or first it will humiliate you. And I think if we're going to grow in honesty, we have to be willing to be humiliated or angered by the truth, and then to come with that to God. I think of Paul the apostle as he confronts his weakness. He comes to the Lord and he says, "Please take away this." It's a messenger from Satan. It's a satanic attack. It's a thorn in the flesh. It's something that my flesh is fighting against. And he says, "Lord, please take this away." And God says, "No, Saul, I've left that. I'm leaving that in you because in your weakness you will find my strength." And I think leaders who really are living godly leadership are those who are living with their weakness, but drawing on the strength of God. God leaves us to continue in our weakness so that we may know his strength, so that we may never be able to claim the glory because I'm so great, because I'm not great. I know I'm weak, but I have to give God the glory because he's helped me in this weakness. And so I think it's I'd love to be able to say it's all great and it all works so wonderfully, but no, if we're going to define reality for ourselves and in our leadership, we have to face the fact that we are needy of God and also needy of other people. We cannot do it alone. And leaders that succeed are those who have built up a team around themselves, not just of yes people, not just of those who agree with them, but leaders who are going to challenge them, others who are going to confront them, and guide them sort of into thinking, well, what does God really say? Because at the end of the day, it's not my opinion versus your opinion. It's we got to wrestle together and say, what is God saying to us in our leadership so that we can go forward in faith and confidence to him. So, um, yeah, I think that's a challenge is if you see anybody who's really effective in ministry, in leadership, in God using them, they have spent time in the wilderness. They have spent time being tested. They have spent time going through the tough stuff, where they've been humbled and they're at a place now where not my will, but your will be done. Um, that we're willing to go there, and I think that's so. It's not an easy road. It's the as you put there the courage of being honest about ourselves and about our situation and trusting God with it. But again, that leads the blessing of it is it comes to a point where we then celebrate God rather than our accomplishment. And there's so much more fulfillment in honoring him and celebrating him. There's we celebrate others. I'm stepping out of my leadership roles in next year. And one of the things the Lord has challenged me is as I look back over my legacy, as I look back over all the things that have been accomplished, who are the people I need to say thank you for being there with me? This is your legacy as well. My PA has been with me for some 20 years. I would never have been able to accomplish what I've accomplished without her having been there. So I think the other side of a leader facing reality is realizing, number one, I need help, help from God, but I also need help from others, and recognizing that help, affirming them, appreciating them, thanking them. Max Dupree, who this quote of, he says, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, went on to say, and the last is to say thank you. And so I think good leaders, you will find that they end up where they realize that they've not done it alone. They've got a team of people that they're thankful for and grateful for. Yeah. Don't know if I've really answered your question there, but for what it's worth.
Brilliantly. Thank you so much. There were a few really golden nuggets, what you said, for us to learn to live with our weaknesses and lean into the strength of God. And also loved what you said about us. This brings us to a point of really celebrating and glorifying God and celebrating and thanking others. And I feel like that's the real fruit of good leadership, mature leadership. not the strength and the, knowing everything, having it all together that we tend to put on a pedestal. So thank you
Mm.
so much for that,
Yeah, you're
Peter.
welcome.
So you also mentioned these leadership allergies and blind spots, which we all have. Those default reactions that keep us from seeing the truth. It happens so quickly that I think it often goes unnoticed. And that's why it's so great to have this moment together that we can take a moment to, um, yeah, to learn how to do this better, for it not to go unnoticed because it matters so much.
Mm.
So what can we do practically to start identifying our own versions of that? Have you got some questions that we can ask ourselves to define reality more honestly?
Well, I think some principles first is we really do need to be committed to facing reality, and I need to be willing to risk it by asking, even as Ian did earlier on, by asking and inviting honest feedback. And not just it's not just I'm asking for feedback, it's who do I ask feedback from? Sometimes the feedback from my critic is going to be far more honest and helpful than feedback from my friend. Um, and so sometimes we need to be willing to ask uh, feedback from people that otherwise we probably we'd rather not hear from. So I think it's an attitude of being really honest about needing feedback. Um, and as some people put it, embrace realistic people, not just those who make you feel good. And sometimes as a leader, I'm feeling vulnerable anyway. So I don't need another person to come and point fingers at me or whatever. But as a sense, I do need that person. Um, and not just to go with those that I'm feeling comfortable with and warm to and affirmed by. So it's a tough one. And I think that's often sometimes the toughest point of leadership is if there are times where I may listen to my critic and where I have to go and confront my friends and say, guys, we haven't got it right. We can't just go ahead with what we've all liked doing and have agreed to do. We need to pay attention to some of these other things to stay relevant and to be effective. So, in terms of and it's a prayerful. You started with Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and I think of David praying Psalm 51, where we honestly just come to God and say, God, please show me where I need to do something differently. Show me where I'm holding on to something I need to let go. Show me where I'm not honoring people that I need to honor. So I think this whole thing of totally dependent on God to help us with our blind spots. He can see those and can help us through them. So some of the questions is, what truth about myself uh, and my leadership am I avoiding or ignoring? What truth about myself or my leadership am I avoiding or ignoring? And then who am I listening to? Um, or who am I choosing not to listen to? There are some spokespeople out there who've got a lot to say to us, but are not going to unless we invite them to. So who am I listening to and who am I not choosing not to listen to? And then quite clearly, as God reveals, what are my blind spots? What are those things that I just can't see and I need people's help to see those things or choose not to see because I feel vulnerable or threatened by them?
That's so good. Thank you so much, Peter. I actually just want to bring that up because it's so helpful to see those questions. So can you see my screen? We have a few here, defining our reality. What truth about myself and my leadership am I avoiding or ignoring? Who am I listening to? When you said that, I was like, "Ew, that's such a good stock take starting point. Who am I choosing not to listen to? And what are my blind spots?" And I really pray, I mean, this could feel overwhelming, and how do I identify this? But that the Spirit would guide you in this. So that firstly you would have the courage to, I'm saying this to all of the leaders, that you would have the courage to go on this path, that this conversation has stirred that desire for this, and that these questions could be a good starting point and really equipping for you to discover what is hidden, and lead you to a place of really glorifying God and celebrating others, because we all need that.
Mm,
That is what we want to do. So thank you so much, Peter, for your teaching and for your insights, and that you bring your experience to
yeah.
us, and guide us in such an important thing that we often underestimate. I really appreciate
Mm.
and value your time. And I'm
No,
gonna
thank you for the opportunity, and sorry if the preacher got loose there a little bit now and then.
Not at all. Peter promised me right at the beginning before we started that no, actually, Renee, who knows Peter, said that he only follows the Holy Spirit. So I was completely at ease with where you're taking us,
Yeah.
and just the insights and the wisdom that you share. And this is something that seems like a simple principle, but is so incredibly hard to do, to build as a practice. And so, because it is so hard to do, we are going to take some time now together, and I really want to encourage everyone to stay with us. We're going to bring up an AHA slide. Ian's going to lead us through this. And won't you tell us? I'll just bring this up again.
One second,
Later.
Nina. Just
Oh, yes.
before you do that, maybe just stop sharing for one moment. I just wanted to give Peter an opportunity. We already had some time before this session to pray for this time together, and just anything that's in your heart, any bit of advice, any final thought, Peter, that you would, you've got leaders who are carrying a mission and working in incredibly tough circumstances. And this has been such a timely word for me, I think for all of us. Just any final thoughts, any final wisdom that you could share.
It's a tough one, Ian. Um, yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's focusing on it's what God wants, and I think as leaders sometimes we get that skewed. That if God doesn't fully own my purpose or the vision statement of my organization, and I'm not convinced about it, um, then there's something wrong
Mm.
because it's got to be His leading, His prompting, what He wants, and that to me is the biggest challenge, is coming to that point, and then where we together as a team are convinced together, and then understand how what we contribute contributes to what He wants to accomplish through us. Because it's very easy to just be mission drift, and we get sidelined and we get caught up in other things. And we start bickering with my opinion versus your opinion. So to me, I think the biggest thing is, and in the world today, more and more people are avoiding talking about the calling of God, and sort of denying that actually God leads us specifically in what He wants us to do. And I feel that that's a great danger, because then we cannot go ahead with conviction and faith if we don't know that this is what God wants us to do.
Wow, that's a great nugget. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Peter. It strikes me just as you were saying that it's risky to seek feedback. It's far more risky to not. The dangers of not getting feedback, not getting input, not seeking. I love what you said. Feedback from my critic is likely to be far more honest than feedback from my friend. And that really struck me as a truth for us to carry. And so, yeah, thank you, Peter. You've served us incredibly well and spoken quite deeply for all of us today. So, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Nina, for leading us so wonderfully, so gracefully through the conversation today. And Peter, bless you for the wisdom and just the work that you've done to bring this to us. We're so thankful, Peter, for you and for what God has brought to us today. So thank you, everybody.